Res Dog Walkers live on location at the First Nations Forestry Council in Penticton. I'm honored to have my good friend and Minister of Forests as a guest, Ravi Parmar. How are you, my friend?
Oh, Dallas, it's always a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on. This is exciting.
I am. It's worked out so well. Usually you're like, oh, I'm going to another conference. I'm going to another conference. I was like, oh, I need to talk to that person. I need to talk to that person. And your people were really good about making it work. So thanks for coming on.
Well, and it's late, so I apologize for keeping you waiting. But hey,
this is reconciliation isn't a 9 to 5.
Exactly.
That's what we're doing. But
it's not even a 9 to 9.
No, not even a 9 to 9. But that's okay. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. But thank you for having me on.
Oh, thanks for coming on. It's always interesting when you get to talk to a minister. You're going through some changes. You've got a new deputy in now. You know, you guys have just gotten a new mandate recently, last year.
Yeah.
You know, how are things going right now? You got a lot on the plate right now. You sure do. Timbers review. You and I are dealing with some softwood lumber issues for now. We got a bit of a trade dispute on top of the softwood lumber disputes. When do you find time to sleep?
That's a really good question. You know, I love my community. Like, Langford is home for me, and boy, do I ever miss it. But on the other side, I've gotten a chance over these last 6 months to travel British Columbia. Like, I'm a kid from Langford who has not left the island much in my life. And so, to be honest, I even traveled north of the Malahat for most of my life. And so getting the chance to be able to visit so many communities has been incredible. It was, 6 months ago, Dallas, that I sat across from a premier like this and did something that some may argue was political suicide. And that was asked to be the Minister of Forests. It was a job I wanted. I'm really thankful that the Premier listened to my advice and gave me a shot. And it's been an absolute blast. And I knew it was going to be a challenging portfolio. We face significant challenges. I don't know how I would have felt about asking about the portfolio if the Trump tweet had happened. But, you know, jokes aside, it's an incredible portfolio. The Forest Service is an incredible team. We face challenges. But I like challenges. I think there's opportunities there. And you're right, whether it's launching a review of BC timber sales, where I got 3 incredible British Columbians, Brian Frankel, Lenny Joe, George Abbott, helping me out and helping to advise me. And you know, the work that you're doing alongside another group of incredible British Columbians and an Albertan too. Rick Dobin lives in Alberta now, providing advice to me on softwood lumber. It's been an absolute blast. Do you know Corky Evans?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a student of history, and I got a chance in this job to be able to meet incredible people that I've never met before, that I've looked up to in terms of politics. And Corky was one of those guys that I always wanted the opportunity.
First cabinet minister I ever met, actually, back in the dying days of the NDP government in the 90s.
Yeah.
I met Corky Evans.
Health minister.
We were just actually working on the start of the Great Bear Rainforest.
Oh, okay.
And so he was a part of a cabinet committee.
Yeah. Like, he's a force to be be with. Very similar to yourself, right? Witty, gifted orator. Like, you know, there's a joke that's in the legislature. You know, one of the things that the clerk says is, if you want to go and watch a maiden speech, you know, the best maiden speech ever delivered in the legislature was Corky Evans. And getting a chance to meet people, you know, so much of our time, Dallas, in politics and political life, we're often spent in our silos. And I said quite bullishly to the Forest Service and to people, I don't care where your position is, unless our values clearly don't align, and it's a harm for us to meet. You know, 99% of the time, people have great perspectives. I may end up disagreeing with their perspectives in the long run when it comes to making a decision, but there's so many great ideas. And I learned from my mentor, John Horgan, at a very early age, before one should act, they should be doing a lot of listening and learning. It's just been a blast.
You know, there's a couple of things you said that I want to pick up on as we go through this conversation. You know, one is the history. I'm glad you brought up John Horgan. So I'd like to talk about just your background with him, and how you came to be a politician. You know, spending some time in the weeds and learning how government worked and doing some of those things. But then also the patience and the values aligning. As you and I have dealt with some challenging files over the last 4 or 5 months, we've been in a position where not necessarily all of the people in the legislature's values are aligning right now. So we'll pick up a couple of those things, but let's back it up a little bit. You're a relatively young man. You came into politics. You live in Souk. You live in Souk still?
Langford. Sorry,
I live in Langford. I should know that. My daughter just had a softball game there yesterday.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, so we were down at the beautiful field, great complex facility, and it was kind of good. I bet you my friend John Horgan probably had a lot to do with. Oh, yes, sir, it does. An MLA, yeah. But so yeah, why don't you just talk about when you first met John and came through? I know you've known him. for a long time.
2005 provincial election. It goes a little bit further back for me in terms of politics. My parents were healthcare workers in the early 2000s, and they were both laid off by the former BC Liberal government when Gordon Campbell came in and privatized cleaning and custodial and catering services. They both worked at Royal Jubilee. And so I remember as a kid, I would have been maybe 6 or 7 at that point, walking picket lines. And I don't think I fully understood at that time what I was doing, other than, this looks really fun. And that I did not like Gordon Campbell at that time. But, from there, it was 2005 provincial election, and I was drawn, seeing the signs go up, following the debates, mesmerized by Carol James and her leadership. And so we were doing a project, and my teacher, Miss Alton, give her full credit for this. She just retired in the last few years as a great teacher in the Souk School District. Doing this project, I was always a bit of a keener Dallas. And so I went up to her and I said, "Hey, Miss Alton, what can I do to get some extra credit? What can I do to ensure that I get an A on this project?" No grade 5 student in British Columbia is probably asking that question, so that it probably explains how big of a weirdo I am. And so I asked her, and she's like, "Well, why don't you invite the local MLA who's successful in the riding to our class? They may say no. They may be really busy. But if you do that, then I'll give you some extra credit." So that was John Horgan. He had just won his first election as the MLA for, I think it was Malahat Wandafuka, the first iteration. And I can still picture the day standing outside my school. I was joked that I was relatively tall. I was great at basketball at elementary and middle school because I was 6 feet. And then everyone else got tall, and the skills didn't continue. But I remember standing outside Millstream Elementary School in Langford, and here comes John Horgan, who pulls up in a Subaru, and there's a Ban Raw Log Exports sticker on the back, and there's a story within that, I'm sure, as you're aware. But he pulls out, and I just remember seeing this big guy pull out of his car, start walking up to me in a suit with a big smile on his face. Took him to my classroom. We spent probably about an hour, and I'm like interviewing him, asking him questions in front of my classmates. And I remember at the end, he signed my, I give an autograph to a bunch of kids there, but he signed my set of interview questions. I really wish I kept that document. I have no idea where it is, but ever since, he became a mentor to me. When I made the decision to run for school board, he supported me. Funny enough, he actually discouraged me initially in getting into politics at a young age, because he's like, "Rav, you need to go and have some fun. Go party it up at university, enjoy this time." And it just really wasn't me. And so I owe everything. Like, I would not be sitting in this chair across from you if it wasn't for John Horgan. The family means everything to me. My family just adores the man. And so when we lost him last year, that was really tough, really, really tough, but so thankful for the memories, so thankful for his wit and his humor, and just the little things that I know that I'm going to be able to carry on with me for the rest of my life. And I know that in tough days, it's not just me. There's others that'll remind me about his stories. Porky was telling me about some of the stories that he had this morning, working with John when he was a staffer, very similar to the role that I had before becoming an elected in the legislature. And just, one of a kind guy. Gosh, do I ever miss him.
I bet. I first met John Horgan. He was chief of staff to Dan Miller, I believe.
Oh,
when Dan Miller was premier for a little while, and it was a different day. I believe he actually had to go on a cigarette run.
I had no idea that Horgan was a smoker.
Well, Dan Miller was.
Well, Horgan was too. That's what Corky told.
Oh, he must have hit it well.
I don't know if Ellie knows that, but Dan Miller is definitely a smoker.
Dan Miller is definitely a smoker. Yeah.
Still is.
Yes, to this day. But yeah, I think, John Horgan was a wonderful man. I mean, I ran for Christie Lark in 2017. It's not really a secret to our listeners.
We still love you, Dallas.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I had my first meeting with the premier after that, and he sort of, can you come see me for a minute? I'm like, oh, shit. Here we go, because we think Angry John, Drake election, and all those sorts of things. And I walk into his little private office, and he just says, hey, you took a shot at it. I'm glad you did, but you're still a First Nations leader, and I look forward to working with you a little bit more. And so kind of cleared the air a little bit. It helped me out because, as elections get tense.
They sure do.
We're going through a federal one right now.
Absolutely.
Well, it's horrible watching it regress, but we'll save some of that for the other time, for the next item. But so you ran, you were successful. Who were you in MA for when you were?
So I started with Doug Donaldson, or actually
That's where I met you first, I think.
Yes, but I worked for Ginny Sims, which was the Minister of Citizen Services, and so I got a lot of respect for citizen services because I always say that's the engine of government, and so it helped me get a foundational understanding of how government operates. Then John asked me to go to work in the Ministry of Forest, predominantly with Doug Donaldson, but most of my time ended up being spent with the new parliamentary secretary that he appointed at that time, and that was Ravi K, the older Ravi. And so I'm sure it was his idea, just knowing him. He just loved the thought of two Ravis hanging out together. And in 2018, 2019, you'll remember that was when we saw a significant amount of mill closures and curtailments across the province, in particular in places like Mackenzie, Houston, and Fort St. James and Merritt in the interior. And so Ravi went on a bit of a road trip, visiting these communities and getting a better understanding of it. And now Ravi K, who I joke around with, the older Ravi, younger Ravi, but similar to John, has just played such a mentorship role model for me. I owe a lot of my success to him as well. I served as an MA to him, and then when he became the Minister of Jobs, I became his chief of staff and continued in that role until he went into becoming the Minister of Housing. And that's when I worked for Brenda Bailey for a little bit of a period of time before I wrapped things up and decided to put my name on a ballot in that by-election that John retired. But it was quite a fun experience being a political staffer. And I think it's suited me well to be able to help transition myself into the role of an MLA. And
I was understanding the mechanics of how government actually works, even from the nonpartisan side. There's a certain way that things function, and so having a comfort level that must be helpful for you.
I think so. I think it. I don't think the government would function very well if all of us came up with that path. What I love about being a member of a caucus and being a member of a cabinet is you have this team of people with different perspectives, different life experiences. I think of my colleagues who are nurses and what they bring to the table. I think of the work, one of the people that I always look up to, especially since I lost John, is Adrian Dix. The guy is an encyclopedia of information. And so just watching him, during my time as a backbencher MLA, I always watched him and questioned because he was up on his feet a lot. But just the style that he had, how he worked with other MLAs, there's so many incredible colleagues I have, new ones like Randy Neal, too, who is just an absolute rock star, and so many others, Steve Morsek from the interior. I could just go on and on naming them, that I've really enjoyed getting to know. And there are others that I'm starting to get to know on the other side, like Rob Botterill, and I've spent a bit of time talking about forestry, and there's some other conservative MLAs that I'm starting to get to know and getting a bit of a feel in terms of where they stand. And, my critic and I have had a chance to spend a little bit of time together and appreciate the experience that he brings. And that's what I love about the legislature is
I like the loud talker. I've noticed
he is a very
loud talker. Yeah. At first I was kind of like, oh, okay, you're just a loud talker. That's okay.
Logger. Yeah. It's a logger.
Yeah. That's
exactly.
My uncle's the same way. I think that's tremendous that people don't realize that some of those relationships get built across the floor.
They do, yeah.
And I spent some time with Stan Hagen and got to just sit in the house and watch things and watch the interactions he had specifically with certain members of the other side.
Yeah.
But then just watching some of the shit that just been playing out. I guess it's my podcast. I can swear if I want.
Oh gosh, if usually I will. That
Watching some of the things play out over the last little while, I've sort of been thinking about it. I mean, I haven't shied away from it, but we've had some challenges with the opposition. There's a lot of new people and not a lot of new blood. And one of the things I think I've taken for granted over the years, because I've been around since Dan Miller, haven't been a prominent role, but since Christy Clark, definitely, I played a prominent role in some reconciliation policy development. And this election, it got so scary. Just hearing the rhetoric that's out there. I'm having challenges with my own MLA on just making sure she understands the history and evolution of reconciliation. And I think that's one of the challenges that hopefully time sorts out, is we've got so many new faces in politics now. When the Conservatives made that charge, and they had so many new people who haven't been plugged into the history, at least with the traditional NDP Liberal, they were all in the House together for a long time, totally going back and forth. They want some of these things evolve and develop to the benefit of British Columbians. And then you got this whole cast of new characters who haven't realized how reconciliation policy started with one little document and then turned into this and then turned into that. And so for some of these people, it's hard for them to conceptualize that reconciliation truly is a path forward. So I'm interested in, your approach as the Minister of Forests. You obviously have to deal with all the ridings. You don't have the luxury of just focusing on the Lower Mainland or focusing on area. You have to be out there. Are you building some relationships with the MLAs? I mean, I noticed you've been touring around.
Oh, for sure.
Around. You give them a heads up when you're coming into town. And
no, to be honest with you, I don't. Yeah, which maybe I should. And I think it will take some time to develop those relationships for sure. Because some of them have said some really crazy things. And to be honest with you, I don't know if I want a relationship with them. Your MLA, in particular, not to pick on her, has said some pretty hurtful things. And what I find is a lot of them say these things outside of the legislature, in their communities, but they don't have the gall to actually go in and stand up in the legislature. Like Anna Kindy is an example. Doesn't stand up in the legislature very often. And I'm just waiting for the day now. So waiting for the day for her to ask a question on forestry. Because again, this is a person who was referred to First Nations, your nation, being greedy, purchasing a tree forest license. Like how in 2025 do we have that level of
without displacing one job?
Exactly. Like John Jack was at Kofi. I was on a panel with him, and he was so eloquent in his remarks. Like I wish I could paraphrase the entire 2 minutes that he gave, but the message that he was trying to deliver that hit home for me was there are nations that want to be a part of forestry. And what John shared with me, and I spoke to him last week about the work that the Ho8 are doing on forestry, is, they're not making money to go send to their shareholders in New York, unlike other forest companies. They are raising money to be able to pay for mental health counselors, to be able to pay for a school bus, to be able to give their members the supports they need. And to have MLAs that, say one thing and then say these hurtful things is really scary. But there are others who I think hopefully will step up and stand up. I spent a little bit of time with Sheldon Clare, who's an MLA from, I think, Prince George. I can't remember the exact name of the ridings.
One of the 4 ridings there.
What are the Prince Georges? And he said some pretty hurtful things about residential school denialism and some of those pieces. I understand. But I was landing in Prince George to go to the Kofi convention, and it was like midnight in Prince George, and I was like, shit, look at that. I
started there. Tidal wave.
I was like, shit. I don't know if I'll be able to get a cab at midnight. And he was kind enough. He offered, and he said, hey, why don't I save the taxpayers some money and give you a ride to your hotel? And I was like, well, that's a really nice thing to do. And he did. And so I'm hopeful that we'll be able to build a rapport and a relationship. But you're right. This election was a bit scary. As a former candidate yourself, in the past, there has been this contentious battle between the NDP and the Liberals around the economy versus jobs, in the environment versus the economy. And it's changed now, right? Where, my job is to ensure that we have a strong, sustainable forest sector for the next 100 years. And instead of a conservative government that is fighting for the economy and fighting for workers, they're doing the polar opposite.
Mhm.
They are fighting, this dog whistle politics that we've dealt with already and we've put behind ourselves. And it's really scary because they almost won, Dallas. Like, Premier Ebio said it's
Well, go to Guildford.
exactly. And I would say we experienced a near-death experience just a few months ago, and that was a wake-up call for the Premier, for myself, and we have to do better.
Yep.
We have to do better. We have to go out and engage communities. It breaks my heart to not see my friend Michelle Babchuk as your MLA, because I think Michelle was a rock star. I think she did such a great job representing her communities, but clearly the people of the North Island felt otherwise. And so it's my job, as is my colleagues, to go and do the important work and understand why that was.
It's interesting. I think it was about a week before the election, we actually went to a rally in Michelle's office. And when I walked in, all of our staff got all, oh, what's he doing? And then I took my jacket off and I had this big orange sweatshirt.
It was 2009, right?
Well, it's 2017, but yeah.
Was it 2017 that you ran?
2017.
Goodness, I thought it was earlier than that. Okay.
Yeah, Claire Chavie and I went toe to toe, and
that was 2017.
It's funny, everybody's talking about these debates. Claire and I did like 6 debates together, and by the 4th one, it was very curt and very polite. But we had both gotten in each other's heads enough that it was just uncomfortable, which was sad, because that was the one thing I didn't like about running, was brought out part of me that I could do. I'm good at, I watch a lot of Saturday morning wrestling, so I could do the over-the-top stuff, which I had fun with. But actually saying something mean to somebody because they wore a different color shirt that I was wearing, that wore on me after a little bit of a while. I didn't like the partisan.
In the legislature, I'll be the first to admit, there's some things in the legislature, that partisanship stuff, that I love.
Yeah.
And again,
legislature is a place where it's the arena for it.
Totally. And I would love to have participated in debates. My Conservative candidate decided not to participate, and the Green candidate was just a bit of a fill-in. And so I would have just been debating myself most of the time. But in the legislature, a lot of people joke about question period. You've attended a lot of question periods in your time following politics. And a lot of it is theater, right? It's the opposition getting a good clip, getting a zinger on a minister, and a minister hitting back, and sometimes not answering the question, and providing their perspective on where they believe the question should have gone. And so there are parts of that I enjoy, without a doubt.
Yeah.
But then there's other parts that I think are so critical and are sometimes forgotten. Like, I went through 6 hours of estimates debate with Ward, and that was a lot of fun. I joked with Ward. I'm like, ask for an extra 6 hours. Let's do 12 hours next time. Like, this is important stuff. We barely covered, the ministry. We didn't get a chance to jump into the BC Wildfire Service very much. And so there's odd aspects of it that I really enjoyed. And it was a great experience because Ward is very new to politics. And he comes with his experience as a logger working in forestry. And so he had some really great questions that I really enjoyed.
Yep. I think that's really the only path through, is through debate and discussion. I mean, people only see the bad guy. It's the one part. I mean, I love messing around on social media. I don't really take it too seriously, as you know. But that's unfortunate, is the general layperson seems to be taking those 90-second clips or the 30-second clips of a 17-minute speech, or things like that. So, I mean, I think we'll find the happy medium.
Well,
there.
Pierre Poilievre kind of made a bit of a name for himself doing that, right? And it was, one could argue, is very effective. Like, he did very similar to, I guess, Tom Mulcair. He was a very effective opposition leader, embarrassing, the Liberals. I know I should be the last person to predict elections. It doesn't look like it's going to pay off on Monday, but who knows, right? Who knows? But that aspect of it, I think people turn their attention to, but they should focus on the community work. And there's a lot of MLAs on the other side that I've reached out, and I've just said, hey, can I give you my perspective on an issue in my community? And you focus on that. But I do worry about some of the people in that caucus and the approach that they take, like Brent Chapman. Man, like, I don't think I can have a conversation with that guy. Like, I genuinely feel sick seeing him in the legislature. The hateful stuff that he said that I've yet to see a fulsome apology on makes it really tough. Anna Kindi, another one, to see the remarks that she's made after being elected. And then
it's weird. I actually grew up in White Rock. Or we can do where you're at. So I was like, oh my God, I went there, then I moved to the island, away from that.
But what we have to do is we have to call that stuff out.
Yeah.
We have to stand up for ourselves, stand up for our relationships, and that means we can't go backwards. And we have to show that and share that story with British Columbians. We're doing incredible things together. And will your nation and the government agree on everything? No. But that's okay. There's still so much good work. I think of the Numgees First Nations and the pilot FLP project, Forest Landscape Planning Table work that is happening. That is setting the pathway up for so many other nations. I think of your nation and ISCOM and the work that they are doing in terms of establishing themselves with the leadership of another force to be reckoned with, Chief Robert Dennis. There's so much. George Lampro, I don't know if you know, Chief of the Simp Nation. That guy is incredible. I met him at not Kofi, Natural Resources Forum in January.
Right.
And he had a bit of a tense relationship with the ministry. And I could sense that in the conversation, but we've chatted probably a half a dozen times since. And he's told me very, very clearly, Ravi, you got to catch up. Like, I'm way ahead of you. And I'm a bit competitive, Dallas. And so I'm like, shit, okay, I got some work to do. Let's get going, Forest Service. Let's catch up to this guy. Incredible work. Why get in the way of that? Why not help encourage that, help deliver that, help drive that?
I'm glad you brought that up because, as you know, we started with very small forest and range agreements that brought us limited non-renewable license to a point where between myself as the nations I represent, Chief John Jaff and the Hawaiiat, we're the biggest tenure holders on Vancouver Island now. And so, 10, 15 years ago when people were telling me, Smith, it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. There's enough of us who just worked through the system.
Totally.
I think of the success that we've had since the intentions paper, when Premier Horgan announced the intentions paper the intention to get 20% tenure in First Nations hands. We're the First Nations to do that. We took that
and we hit that 20%.
We moved it to 38% now in our territories. And we're finding a way to work with the unions. We're finding a way to make sure that we're keeping the economy strong. We're actually pushing the forest companies to think a lot more longer term right now. We got to get away from this commodity driven quarter by quarter, fiscal quarter by fiscal year. We got to start thinking 5, 10, 12 years, 15 years down the road. Like their these are doing 100 years.
British Dog Walkers is part of an ongoing conversation that connects directly to the upcoming BC Indigenous Resource Opportunities Conference, BC IROC, happening June 18th to 20th, 2025 in Nanaimo, BC. Since its inception, this conference has fostered countless successful partnerships that bring meaningful benefits to First Nations, resource developers, businesses, and all levels of government. BCI Rock continues to lay the groundwork for future collaborations and growth across the resource sector. Visit www.bcirock.ca to learn more about the conference, its sessions, and how you can participate. Look forward to seeing you there.
Like one thing that frustrates me the most is, every day I wake up, Dallas, and I truly mean this. I'm thinking about the workers. I'm thinking about those that are heading out on the logging roads. I'm thinking about those, mums and dads that are heading in to the mill. I'm thinking about all the indirect jobs that are associated with forestry, hundreds of thousands across this province that rely on a strong forestry sector. And it scares me, right? Because we face challenges. We face whatever the threat of Donald Trump and the challenges with a declining timber supply. And I keep thinking to myself, what can I do as the minister to affect change and deliver for workers, deliver for families? Because I think often that gets left out. Like, we've done a great amount of work, and there's a sense of pride in me as a new minister and the work that my predecessors, and in particular Premier Eby and Premier Horgan, have done on protecting old growth, on biodiversity. But I think workers have somewhat felt left out of that. And, one of the things that I have to do is to ensure that at the table, we are thinking of the public interest and we're thinking of those workers. And I think that's going to be a critical part, has been a critical part of my job and continues to be in the time that I'm in this portfolio, is making sure that workers know that they've got a champion. If there's one thing I want to do is move us away from boom and bust to thinking 100 years ahead and really creating the most people-focused forest sector this world has ever seen. And I think that's a really high bar to set. And I think it's not just upon me. but this entire sector, all the licensees, including nations that are taking those leadership roles, to work together towards that. And I think forest landscape planning tables provide those community opportunities. And I think having leaders like yourself sitting at provincial tables, being welcomed to those tables, and not just being welcomed as a guest, but being a leader at that table, at the same seat that I am, helps make that case. Like there's a sense of pride having you at our the Softwood Lumber Advisory Council table, right? Like I when I was thinking about forming that table, it was important for me to have Indigenous representation, and I thought, who could be a thorn on the side of Ottawa's other than Dallas Smith, and I'm so glad you agreed to do that, by the way.
Well, I love to be a thorn in Ottawa's side, so I think it works out. Well, I think you're hitting on something that's really important for the public to realize is, we take these policy aspirations, and then we take the existing policy, and I think it's a good time for the BC Timber Sales Review because I think we can put more tools in the toolbox. So I think one of the things I'm interested in seeing you and your government continue to do is how do you take reconciliation and existing policy and integrate it to a point where we're not the blame anymore.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think those in the know that reconciliation isn't the blame for the lack of resources getting out. I think it hasn't made it easier in some spots. I mean, we grew up in the Great Bear Rainforest where we had the opportunity and there was so much energy and time focused on what we're doing in the Great Bear that we got the opportunity to build some good stuff. And I think that we've learned how to get referrals through an timely practice. And I think that is starting to spread. First Nations in the province are finally quitting to using every piece of Crown land referral as a bargaining chip.
Yeah.
And we're using forest stewardship plans and LLPs to start saying, okay, this is what we're all looking at. What pieces of bureaucratic administration help this and what pieces hinder it? And I think that's really where the discussion needs to go, Minister. So I'm really happy that you brought in, someone of the ilk of Mackenzie Lane, who has not only been a practitioner in the forest industry for 20 years, she's also worked very closely with First Nations and understands how some of these gaps need to be bridged because as the senior civil service starts to move on and retire, we have some great young minds coming.
They sure do.
I think of some of the ADMs that you have who are really just starting to find their potential because of the challenges of some of the files.
Absolutely.
And so it's really nice to see we're getting that political, bureaucratic, and technical discussion integrated to a point where we're all achieving on the output.
Absolutely.
Not at the end of the day.
Well, and I think you put it in a great position, Dallas. Like that trust piece is critical. And so why it was so important for me to hit the ground to go and build those relationships with people like you. One could argue you could do that in Victoria, but really you can't. You can't do that in Victoria. You have to go and visit communities. You have to make yourself available. And I've so enjoyed that. There are a lot of relationships that just didn't exist. And it's my responsibility as the minister of this portfolio and of the Forest Service to go in and put that work and put in as much work as the hardworking men and women of the Forest Service do every single day. And for me to be able to say, I've got your back, let's go and have this conversation together.
Health and forest is probably the biggest reason or ministries that you actually need to get out there. Yes, each region, each authority, you have different regions that you don't there's the forest and province in. I know Minister Osborne's a good friend of mine, or she has regions that she has to deal with more than others. Education, you got school boards that have that level in between, as you know, as an ex-school board person yourself. But what other things are you looking at? You got the BC Timber Sales Review being led by a good friend of mine, George Abbott. Absolutely. It was nice to hear that George was brought in just because of his pragmatic nature.
So I got to tell you about the George story. So two aspects.
How'd you get that one through?
Admin committee. I love George. So when I was in high school, I went to Belmont in Langford, the old Belmont. Used to put duct tape on the floors, and so I actually lobbied George when he was the education minister, and so I started a walkout. I was a thorn on his side as a high schooler, and I met with him. Horgan actually took me to the legislature, introduced my petition, and introduced me to Minister Abbott at the time, and made my case. I remember Dallas never owned a suit before I went to the legislature, and so my mom took me to the Bay. I was thinking about that because I was walking through the Bay the other day, which is really sad because it's now they're all shutting down. And we bought a suit. I didn't know where, like the little tags here, and I didn't take those off. Like I didn't own a suit, and the only thing I owned as shoes, basketball players, was my Air Jordans. And so
Some black ones,
white with a black suit. And so I'll have to show you the picture. And so I remember going to the legislature. George probably thought, "Who the hell is this kid?" And it made the case. We got the funding, and George and I reconnected years later. We graduated at UVic at the same time when he was doing his PhD,
yeah, that's right.
and I was doing my bachelor's. And it wasn't until after I got into politics as an MLA that I followed him, on LinkedIn, read his book. And I remember Googling George Abbott, and I saw, one of the commitments that he made, I think it was in the 2011 leadership race for the BC Liberals, that he wanted to review BC timber sales. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. I need a person to help advise me on the review of BC timber sales. I'm going to ask George. And I did. And I remember I literally called him at like 9:00 at night. I had just gotten his phone number, and we were messaging each other on LinkedIn. And I was like, gosh, I know I'm a minister, but I shouldn't really be bugging people at 9:00 at night. But he answered the phone, and we talked for like 20 minutes, and he agreed. That night, he's like, I'd be honored to serve. And him, Brian, and Lenny, who's just a gem of a guy. I'm so honored to be able to work with all three of them. I've been doing an outstanding job, and it's not your typical review. It's being done in 6 months. We're making announcements left, right, and center because we don't have time to waste. We have to make changes.
No, I think, the changes take time to settle in as we're all learning how to coexist together. There isn't, we have some broad legislation that gives us a goal, but trying to figure out some policy in there that takes BC timber sales into consideration. As we've been talking about at the Softwood Lumber Advisory Table, we need to look at these existing things and we need to update them so we can have tools of today to deal with exactly today. That's been one of my interesting things as the learning curve's been quite steep on the Softwood Lumber Table. And I've been talking to other people who've been involved in it. We, you and I were talking before we started recording how we wish John Allen was still here with us because he's an encyclopedia.
Totally.
But I've reached out to some other previous deputies of forest. Okay, just tell me what you learned. I'm on this committee now. I'm trying to figure out. And he says, every tool we have in the toolbox doesn't work right now. Yeah, that's how we've just been getting these things. We kick the can. We kick the can down the road. We get some of the tariffs back. We get some of the duties back. But the damage is being done on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to be able to take these pieces and kind of thread them together like a mosaic. We can take the work we're doing on reconciliation. We can take the work that we're doing around forest revitalization. We can take the stewardship work that we're doing even just to present the case that this is a well thought out forest policy. Unfortunately, as you know, we have some problems federally because the duties are a federal piece. We get hammered in Quebec. Yeah. There's no reconciliation in Quebec. I went to Ottawa. I called you when I was in Ottawa a couple of weeks ago, and I went to meet with the Secretary of First Nations, and I'm like, can you tell me who's working on forestry in Quebec? They're like, not First Nations. And so
I haven't been be able to get a meeting with my federal or my counterpart in Quebec. It's a bit surprising, but absolutely, I think Quebec is where BC was at like 20 years ago on forestry. It could be on other things as well. But what I love about the Softwood Lumber Advisory Council is, when I became minister, literally on day 2, I got briefed on softwood lumber, and this was Rick Manwaring and Ian Meyer on the team told me, Minister, typically when you're heading into this period, you would just point a special advisor to help advise you. They would work with the public service. They would go do their thing. In the past, that was John Allen, right? Who played that role. And previously, there was other people that were tasked to help advise that with the BC Lumber Trade Council, others. And so I said, what about First Nations? What about workers? What about value-added folks? Like, how can I bring everyone to the table? And I remember going to see the premier and very early on and say, hey, I'm thinking about just appointing a person, but I'm also thinking about something more broader. And he's like, that's a really good thing. You should think broader. Like, this is, new ground for us, like you said. And so having your perspectives, the like of Rick Slacko, Rick Dobin, Linda Cody, former Kofi president, as well as Dan Battistella and the 3 labor leaders, Gavin, Jeff, and Scott. It's just been incredible. It's been a lot of fun having these conversations. And you're right, like, Softwood has brought us to this table, but we're having broader forestry conversations too. And in a funny way, Trump has brought us all together, I guess, to be able to have these conversations, and they're needed, and we have to take advantage of this moment.
Even the forest companies are listening to some of the concepts we pitched 10, 12 years ago that they just dismissed.
Yeah.
Now that we built these partnerships, they're like, oh, you have First Nations partners in the States that we can go through to maybe avoid some of these tariffs. And so, I mean, there's no, as you know, there's no quick fix, but presenting ourselves with options. And that's one of the great things about ISCM. I mean, I can't go into too much detail about ISCM right now, but having ISCM, a collection of 22 nations that have come together to talk about how can we do more value added? How can we do more manufacturing? How can we make sure that the silviculture practices stay top of mind and those things. So the evolution's really happening, and it's really exciting to be a part of. And it's nice to have an enthusiastic minister who's, ready to take this on. And not that any of your predecessors haven't been. I've been lucky enough to enjoy a relationship for probably the last 12 ministers of forest, but you brought a breath of fresh air that your teams are feeling now. Like there's just more energy to some of these discussions that haven't been there. So I hope you can keep it up.
I hope so too. I hope I could keep the energy up, but I'm having a blast. There's challenging days without a doubt. And some, there are many days where I'm going to bed and I'm thinking, man, am I where I need to be? Have I done enough? Has the team done enough? Like what's taking so long? Why hasn't BCTS done now? I keep getting reminded you did say 6 months, not 4 months.
Yeah.
But, there's just so much. And politics, Dallas, you have no idea how long you're in these roles. We have a slim majority. You never know when you may lose a vote in the House. And so I just want to be able to impact as much change as I can when I'm in these seats. Like I talked to, the likes of Mo Sahota about this. I represent the same area that Mo represented in the 90s. And, he's reminded me when I was a young staffer that, and I feel like it's a duty for me to carry this on for other, South Asian MLAs and ministers and staffers. Like there was a time that, similar to Indigenous people, we weren't allowed in the legislature. And so it's a damn privilege to be sitting in a minister's office, to be able to represent the people of Langford Highlands as an MLA, to represent British Columbians as a minister of forest. And I really don't want to let them down. Like I really don't want to let them down. And so there is that pressure, but, there's also a lot of people who are willing to provide advice and guidance. I've been more active.
Twitter's full of them.
Well, LinkedIn's a better platform for that. I enjoy a bit more time on that, but you're right. Twitter or X, or whatever they call it.
Elon.
Yeah. Oh gosh, is probably not the best use. Blue Sky. Well, who knows? Facebook. Well, it could be a hit and miss too. But look, I love the emails that I get from people. I still have like my public facing email, for.minister@gov.bc.ca. Send me an email anytime. Lots of people do. I still have it like on my phone.
Oh wow!
And so every morning, when I get up, I look at it, and throughout the day, when I get a break, I'll just pop it open and see. And I don't see every email because the team's in there actioning in it, but I get a chance to see a good amount of emails that come in through the day. And it's a lot of fun to see the stuff that comes in because, a lot of it is people telling you you're not doing a very good job and et cetera, et cetera. But there's also some really great ideas that people bring in. Like, and sometimes I'll just shoot a note over to my team and say, hey, I'd really like to just jump on a call with this person and just see what's going on. Or, hey, invite them to the legislature. But like, oh, minister, we can't do that. You don't have time. Like, let's make time.
Find it. Yeah.
I sit till 9 o'clock in the legislature. If someone wants to come and see me up until 9 o'clock, I'll be there. But it's that aspect's been a lot of fun.
Nice. So, I mean, I hope to have you on again. I know we're up here for First Nations Forestry Council. These meetings have gotten better because there's so many more good stories.
Yeah.
When we first started doing Indigenous resource opportunities, we really had to dig to find some of the success stories, and now they're just coming at us from everywhere. You think of the work we're doing in silviculture. I think of the language revitalization work that's taking place in a forest planning background or some of these things. But I just really want to thank you for being on today, and I look forward to carrying on this discussion. Hopefully you'll be a Res Dog regular.
Oh, you bet. I've enjoyed it. As I shared before, I didn't know there was a YouTube component to it, so I'll have to check that out. But I'm a Spotify user, so I have you pre-downloaded. So when we're on a flight, I can just pop open the app, and there's another episode ready to listen to.
Nice. Well, I want to thank my guests for tuning in. I want to remind everybody that the BC Indigenous Resource Opportunities Conference is June 18th to 20th in beautiful Nanaimo, BC. We have Minister Parmar. I'll be there. We have Premier Eby coming to do a Q&A with myself. We're not sure whether I'm interviewing him or who's interviewing me, but we're going to talk about what it takes to get resources, processed and managed in a sustainable fashion. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and a big thank you to our sponsors and partners for supporting the BC Indigenous Resource Opportunities Conference. Your contributions make this important event possible. Res Dog Walkers will continue from First Nations Forestry Council AGM, and we'll see you guys all soon.
Oh, oh, oh. There we go.
That was a lot of fun.
That was a lot of fun.